On today's show, questions for BMAC and the Capitals. What do they need to prioritize this summer? I'll discuss next on this edition of Locked On Capital.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms, including the SiriusXM app and on YouTube. And I want to thank you for making this your first listen each and every day. My name is Dan Holme. I've covered the Capitals for the last 3 seasons for Locked On and various other outlets before that. I'm also the host of the weekly show called The Capitals Minutecast, available wherever you find your podcasts. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. And the best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube and comment anything down below. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we talk about how the weather's warming up. And in a lot of ways, it seems like my mind and probably your mind is a million miles away from hockey. I know that we have the Hershey Bears and the Calder Cup playoffs and the NHL playoffs are going on, but in a lot of ways, it seems like hockey is in the distant future. However, the free agency, and we'll take a look at that when the free agency is for the NHL on July 1st and what that means for the Capitals. We can't spend too much time with our heads thinking about the summer and in the warm weather. Not all of us can. Brian McLellan has a lot of things that he needs to prioritize to get this team in working order. We'll talk about that a little bit later. We'll talk about scoring depth. That is something that the Capitals struggled with this past season with Alex Ovechkin getting off to his slow start. They need more scoring up and down the lineup. We'll talk about that a little bit later. We'll talk about the future of Nick Backstrom, TJ Oshie, and the LTIR situation. And then in the final segment, we'll talk about answering the questions in net. But just to get it going here, talking about what needs to change. And like I talked about there in the beginning, it is summer. It's nice and warmer, I guess, late spring. And in a lot of ways, it seems like hockey is a million miles away, but there's a lot that needs to be addressed before puck drops in the fall. And just taking a look here, the Capitals faced a roller coaster of a season, culminating in a disappointing playoff exit at the hand of the Rangers. Despite a late season surge to secure a postseason spot, the Capitals fell victim to a 4-game sweep, leaving fans and players alike reeling from the abrupt end to their season. And I talk about this quite often, about them doing the unthinkable and making it to the playoffs. And that victory in and of itself seems rather shallow when they were eliminated in 4 games. As the dust settles on their season, all eyes are on Brian McLellan to steer the team in a new direction. With the Caps seemingly stuck in the middle of the pack, McLellan faces the daunting task of charting a course for the team's success, whether it's through strategic roster moves, tactical shifts in gameplay, or a combination of both. The Caps checklist will be a reflection of the team's determination to rebound from this setback and aim for greater success in seasons to come. And, you know, there was a lot of things that were thrown at the Capitals that weren't expected. I don't think anyone had Nick Backstrom stepping away from hockey. At least I don't think it happened a lot quicker than I think a lot of us thought. And then TJ Oshie and the issues that he dealt with. The Capitals are faced with a decline in scoring prowess, ranking 28th in the NHL this past season, with the potential departures of key players such as Backstrom and Oshie. And the recent trade of Kuznetsov, the team is in need of significant offensive reinforcements. And, you know, everything I've seen and read from a lot of the different insiders is don't expect anything too big. Don't expect for Brian McLellan to go out and get that big fish out there or that big free agent. That he plans on doing small moves similar to what he did last summer, like a Pacioretty, Joel Edmondson, and then hoping that, you know, these young players step up and play a bigger role. The salary relief from Backstrom's LTIR status will provide flexibility for the potential signings, particularly at the center position where Dylan Strome and McMichael may not fully meet the team's needs. That's something to look at a little bit closer as well, is that we take a look at Strome and McMichael are good, but are they elite enough to play and help facilitate the goal scoring of Alex Ovechkin? In light of the departures of Backy and Kuznetsov, there is a pressing need to acquire a dynamic center with offensive creativity to invigorate the team's scoring capabilities. Again, I think that Ovi got off to his slowest start for a couple reasons: a new head coach and the lack of chemistry at the center position. Furthermore, the team's lack of scoring depth on the wing is evident, with only 3 wingers exceeding 15 goals last season. Given Ovechkin's age and the departure of Mantha, there is a clear need for additional scoring wingers to complement this existing lineup. Here. And, it's all going to depend on how aggressive Brian McClellan chooses to be on July 1st. Is he willing to move out some big players to bring in some big players? That is the question. Looking ahead to the 24-25 season, it is imperative for the Capitals to address their scoring deficiencies in order to remain competitive. The acquisition of multiple impact point producers will be crucial for the team's success, whether the strategy is to pursue immediate playoff contention or undertake a more gradual retooling process. Addressing the scoring gap should be a priority. And I think they do have internal options. I do expect to see more from Connor McMichael. I do expect to see more from Hendrix, LaPierre, and even Miroshnichenko, those type of players. But are they enough to make this team competitive enough to play with the likes of the Rangers, the Hurricanes, the Panthers, the Stars, those kind of things, to not just to eke out a victory here or there, but to hold court with some of the best teams in the NHL. And McMichael is going to be a key thing coming forward. We know that he is a restricted free agent, so we don't necessarily need to put that on the front burner, but it is definitely something that needs to be addressed. Perhaps a bridge deal, something like that. The Caps are facing an important decision regarding the contract of Connor McMichael. Unlike the early signings of Alexi Protas, McMichael's contract negotiations have been delayed. After a promising rookie season, McMichael spent most of the 22-23 season in the minors, where he showcased his offensive skills and contributed it to a deep playoff run. The experience helped him make a significant impact in the NHL this season, recording 18 goals and 15 assists in 30 games. So taking a look at what McMichael has done for the Capitals, he has grown, but is he going to make a big enough impact to fill the void that a lot of these aging players that are either showing diminished returns or have stepped away from hockey indefinitely? Given McMichael's relatively limited NHL experience and potential for further offensive development, a short-term bridge contract seems like a sensible option. However, the Caps recently signed Protas, somewhat recently here, to a 5-year deal despite his similar lack of experience and offensive track record, which suggests that a longer-term contract for McMichael is also feasible. It's something that needs to get done. And I spoke about this last summer that, this past season needed to be the season for Connor McMichael. And I think that he has grown by leaps and bounds, and primarily with how he showed up clutch in the Calder Cup the previous year. A lot of those players grew into their own and took it to the next level. If the Caps opt for a bridge contract, it could be in the range of $2 million, possibly structured to provide a higher qualifying offer at the end. This approach would also free up cap space for potential roster changes in the upcoming summer. On the other hand, a bridge contract that extends into unrestricted free agency territory might exceed $4 million. So as they say, it's best to strike while the iron's hot. Take care of this before it gets to be a situation where we need to take care of it now, or he's going to test the market, impacting the team's immediate cap space, but potentially becoming a team-friendly deal. In the long run, we need players to fill the role of Nick Backstrom, potentially TJ Oshie, and just a lot of the other players that are probably going to depart. Max Pacioretty, Nicolas Aube-Kubel, Nick Dowd potentially, maybe a netminder, that things could get shaken up at least a little bit this summer. The decision on McMichael's contract will likely depend on the Caps' plans for the upcoming season and their willingness to allocate cap space for the future. So a lot of intriguing questions for Brian Maclellan and the Capitals to decide on. How do they plan to proceed going forward? Or are they going to hope that this youth movement is going to take them to the next level? All right, so coming up here straight ahead, we will talk about Nick Backstrom and TJ Oshie and the flexibility that potentially those players being on the LTIR will provide. I'll discuss straight ahead. Game Time makes getting NBA Finals tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, and views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. And it's not just NBA tickets, it's also tickets for Major League Baseball. So if you're going to the Nationals game and say you forgot about getting tickets during the day, fear not, as tickets are actually cheaper close to first pitch. So take the guesswork out of buying NBA Finals tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKED ONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all the shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you the can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV Channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So it's unfortunate that Nick Backstrom stepped away from hockey and will probably play his last season or be on the roster for the last season on the LTIR. That potentially could also be said for TJ Oshie. But that bad news, if you will, could also be with some good news, is if those players are on LTIR, what that means for the Capitals and the flexibility that provides. Last season, the Caps faced significant challenges with key players dealing with long-term injuries. Backstrom, who had returned from hip resurfacing surgery, had to shut down his season just 8 games due to ongoing issues with his hip. It was a tough thing, but I saw the writing on the walls. I think that he saw that Connor McMichael was breathing down his neck, that, hey, this guy is not the player that he once was. Put me in, coach. I'm ready to play. As a result, it seems unlikely that he will be able to return in the near future. The situation allows the Capitals to place him on LTIR, freeing up his $9.2 million salary for potential use in free agency or trades during the offseason. So again, a bit bittersweet. I'm going to say some silver lining in the bad story from Nick Backstrom stepping away from hockey. But in addition to Backstrom, TJ Oshie, he's also been battling significant back pain, which has impacted his day-to-day life. We heard about his struggles that when it's the worst, he has to lay on the floor and sometimes urinate into a bottle, a tough situation, and how he had to fly his doctor and his back specialist for Minnesota to get him in game shape. how much is TJ Oshie willing to put himself through? How much do we want him to? At a certain extent, it's like we need to save TJ Oshie from himself. We know that he is the ultimate competitor. He's the guy that talks about even, playing competitive sports with his family when they come over for get-togethers that, hey, you didn't wrestle your relatives during Thanksgiving. That I think that the competitive blood for TJ Oshie runs so deep that to a certain extent, either he's going to do the right thing or maybe a decision will have to be made for him. He has mentioned the possibility of not playing through it in the upcoming season. And ultimately, I think that is the right thing if, in fact, there is no guarantee, which is what he said, that he was looking for some sort of guarantee that he won't have to deal with that. I don't know if there's a doctor or surgeon that's going to provide him with such a guarantee. If Oshie ends up on the LTIR, an additional $5.75 million could also become available. However, the decision regarding Oshie's status may not be made until the start of the season. So that flexibility might not come into focus until closer to the start of the season, unless he does the right thing and say he makes a decision, around, July at some point. That would be optimal to say, hey, I'm going to step away from hockey. I'm going to be on LTIR. That's going to give you guys some flexibility to address any roster positions. That would be the best scenario if he, in fact, is not good to go. This potential increase in LTIR funds provides the Caps with flexibility and additional resources to consider for the roster needs. Again, we might need to move some pieces out, but if we can also free up some cap by putting a couple players on LTIR, I don't think that is the end of the world. The Caps' approach to utilizing LTIR will be influenced by their overall direction and goals. If they are focused on immediate success and want to add win-now pieces, they can use the available funds to pursue impactful players in free agency or through trades. If I was the GM, that's what I would do, because I think to a certain extent, people are like, I want to do this rebuild. It's going to take a long time. Are you going to be okay with the Capitals being less than mediocre for years to come, or would you like to fast track it if at all possible? I know there were the promises made to Ovi, but we don't know exactly. A lot of it is speculative. We don't know. It's anecdotal things that have been said about how that whole situation will play out. But on the other hand, the team's focus is on long-term planning and building for the future. They can leverage LTIR to take contracts that include future assets, providing them with additional resources to strengthen the team in the long term. Again, a long-term plan would be good, but if we remember what the Rangers did a couple years ago, they sent out a letter to the season ticket holders and said, listen, guys, hold on to your seats. It's going to be a rough year or two here, but we're going to be the better for it in the long term. And it wasn't even that. It was maybe a season and a half, and then all of a sudden they were back into contention, and look at where they are now. So it doesn't necessarily need to be this long, drawn-out process. Ultimately, the Caps have the opportunity to strategically leverage LTIR to address their roster needs and align with their overarching team strategy, whether it be immediate success or long-term planning. So I know what I want, but ultimately I think that Brian McClellan is looking at the long-term plan. I think that he's hoping that Miro, LaPierre, are going to be the guys to be the faces of the team in the future. Color me skeptical that that's going to be enough. We saw the addition of Pacioretty, and that didn't really move the needle a whole lot. That I think they need an upper echelon center, perhaps two, and some pieces on the blue line as well, if we want to keep pace with an increasingly improving NHL teams out there that are getting younger and faster. So it's not going to be easy, but I think that is the plan going forward. All right, so coming up here straight ahead, we must answer the question in net. This is probably the most pressing. One of the things that the Capitals have is a luxury of wealth, whether it's on the big team in prospects or down in the minors. They have plenty of options to consider. How will they answer those questions and how will they proceed? I'll discuss straight ahead. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So on this show, quite often, if you're an everydayer, you know I talk about the situation in net that Darcy Kuemper won a Stanley Cup. And, is he as bad as we saw last year in a vacuum? And why aren't we willing to look past that and look at his career in total? And Charlie Lindgren, even though he had a really great season, was that good in a vacuum, or is that sustainable? I point to Anthony Mantha, who played really good in a contract year, but the seasons before, kind of a nothing burger. The Capitals are in a good, unique situation where Darcy Kuemper, Charlie Lindgren, A-plus goalies. I guess some people could argue about the grading a little bit, but competent netminders suffices to say. But the unique situation, the luxury for the Capitals, is they also have great netminders in Hershey. They have some in prospects. They have some for the Stingrays, so that there are plenty of options. Most notably, Hunter Shepard and Clay Stevenson, who I think could fill in flawlessly. So moving out one of those netminders would definitely present another opportunity potentially for the team. The Caps goaltending situation underwent significant changes this season. Darcy Kuemper was initially signed as the long-term starter, while Chucky Sideburns was brought in as a low-cost backup. However, the roles reversed this season, with Lindgren establishing himself as the starter while Kuemper struggled and became the backup. We're paying Kuemper a boatload of money to be a backup. And if he is going to be a backup next year, it just seems like a misutilization of funds. If there's a team willing to take him, move him. We've seen the struggles in net for Toronto. We've seen the struggles in net for Edmonton, Carolina to an extent. Those are just off the top of my head, that there would be teams, I think, willing to take on Kuemper's contract. But is that the right one? I think they could maximize all of this return if they moved out Lindgren, a guy with a year left, $1.2 million left on his contract. That could fetch a handsome return. Again, I think that you bring Hunter Shepard up, I think it would be flawless. I'm not opposed to Darcy Kuemper getting moved out, but I'm talking about maximizing the return. Both goaltenders are under contract for next season, but there is speculation about the Caps GM McClellan may seek to make changes. The direction the team will take, whether to retool or rebuild, will determine which goaltender they may look to move. Again, I wouldn't be too upset if either netminder left. And I know that some people have, left me quite a few comments like, are you crazy? Charlie Lindgren, all that he did. Yep, I hear that. But have you seen Hunter Shepard and Clay Stevenson? Number one and number two, not just for the Hershey Bears, but in all of the American Hockey League. And to quote Braden Holtby, the difference between the NHL and the AHL is razor fine. If the Caps aim to win immediately, they may explore trading Kuemper for another underperforming goalie. Given the unusual number of goalies potentially changing teams this offseason and the availability of veterans with similar contracts, a trade involving Kuemper could be feasible despite his limited no-trade clause. I think that Kuemper, if he sees what's up, I think that if he, sticks his finger to the wind and sees like, I'm going to be a backup again on the Capitals, is there a team that will be willing to take me on as a starter? I think all of a sudden he would be willing to move that a bit there. On the other hand, if the team decides to rebuild, there could be interest in trading Lindgren. Despite coming off a strong season, assigning him to an extension now carries risks. With a relatively low cap hit, Lindgren could have a trade value for teams seeking cost-effective goaltending option. How much better would the Oilers be right now with Lindgren? How much better would the Maple Leafs be with Lindgren? Again, some teams just seemed doomed to failure, Maple Leafs, but I think that on paper it could be big for those teams. And ultimately, I think people get caught up in the fact of those players moving out. I'm talking about the players we could get for moving out such players. Additionally, the Capitals have promising prospects in Hunter Shepard and Clay Stevenson, providing further flexibility. So fear not, Capitals fans. There is a luxury of wealth on this team in the netminding department that if one of those netminders moved out, I would not push the panic button for a second. the Capitals are well equipped. While Mac has suggested that both goaltenders will return next season, it's prudent for the Capitals to explore potential trade options in the coming weeks. Again, I agree with that. I don't want to give away Lindgren. I don't want to give away Charlie Lindgren. But if you can get a really good return, I think in particular, Charlie Lindgren could fetch a huge return, and not by himself. I think that if you bundled it with draft capital, I think that if you bundled it with a younger player, a prospect, maybe a younger player on the current roster, you could fetch a pretty decent return. For example, you move out Lindgren and McMichael for something, you're going to get a pretty big return. Lindgren and LaPierre, a pretty good return. Now, some people are like, whoa, stop the clock here. We can't move out McMichael. We can't. Listen, there are a lot of prospects on this team. And if we can get a player that's more NHL ready, if you will, I think that puts the Capitals in a really good position. We don't want to hope that McMichael is going to turn into a premier goal scorer. We don't want to hope that for LaPierre either. I just think that you need to widen the lens, take the face off the clock, and look at the gears, see what's going wrong with this team, and address it. And some of this is going to take time, but the attitude that's quite prevalent out there is that it's going to take a long time, and just get used to it. Okay, I'll remember that when we're talking about that next season when the Capitals miss the playoffs or they get eliminated in the first round. We saw what happened the previous season. They didn't make it to the playoffs, period. We see this last season. They got eliminated in 4 games. How much of that, as Capitals fans, are you willing to endure? Again, if you're the GM, how would you pursue? Go ahead and hit me up on Twitter at DanCaps218 or at Locked On Caps. You could also send me a message on YouTube. If you'd like to send a video, I could put that on the show as well. If you are the GM of the team, you just heard my ideas. How would you proceed with this team and their roster? Would you move Kuemper or Lindgren? What players would you move out to make this team better? And what are some of the big fish out there on July 1st do you think that BMAC should go after? I'd really like to hear your thoughts as well. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily year-round podcast covering the Washington Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You are ultimately what makes this show successful. When you're done here, head on over to Locked On's 24/7 streaming channel, available on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app and on YouTube. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.